to another episode of ACA Cast. With your host this week, my name is Alex Zito. ACA Cast is the official podcast of ACA International, the leading voice of the accounts receivable management industry. Before we start today's episode, the content is presented for general references only. Evaluating collectors' performance is a key indicator to your business success. Here's a conversation with ACA Collector Magazine Managing Editor Ann Rosso-May.
Hi, I'm Ann Rosso-May, Managing Editor of Collector Magazine, and today I'm talking to Debra Ciskey and Leslie Bender to get their insights on call auditing. Debra is the Executive Vice President of the Collections Coach LLC, and Leslie is the Chief Strategy Officer and General Counsel for BCA Financial Services. They wrote a really interesting article on call auditing, which you can read in the November issue of Collector Magazine, and they've also taught several ACA sessions on this topic too. Debra, Leslie, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Ann.
So let's talk about how agencies use call auditing forms. Why are they important and how common are they?
Agencies have been using call auditing forms for quite a while, and many of us started back even before the regulators, including the CFPB, expressed an expectation for us to monitor and audit calls. So we've had clients that go back many years that have required us to audit calls with them and review calls to ensure that our collectors were treating their customers and patients the way that they expected us to do so. So some clients have requirements for some verbatim disclosures, for example, certain ways that we provide information to their clients, even kind of the level of politeness that our agents might express to their patients and customers. So that's been a common practice within the collection industry for quite a long time. But, my experience is we've been doing it for 15 years or even more. But then when the CFPB came about, they were pretty clear about expressing their expectations that we should be monitoring and auditing phone calls between collectors and consumers to ensure that no consumer harm occurs. And so a lot more agencies then kind of looked at the process that they might like to implement to audit calls. So Leslie, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I would agree, and I think that not only are they a great way to reinforce your compliance expectations in a pretty granular level. I mean, I think in this day and age, we teach so many things to people in call centers during new hire training and stuff like that, that call auditing and providing call listening feedback to people helps them sort of calibrate to client expectations, our compliance standards, regulatory expectations, and then flipping over to if you ever should find yourself defending litigation, having a set and consistent method for listening to calls and giving feedback to representatives can help you not only meet regulatory standards, but also can potentially help you take advantage of a bona fide error defense if you want to show that you do have a fairly robust set of infrastructure attributes that help you prevent bad stuff from happening. I think also they are a great way from a morale perspective for people to feel like they're getting caught doing right instead of just a gotcha situation.
Yeah, I agree with that completely. And I think it also prevents problems with clients if we can identify issues with any particular agent or agents up front and, fix those issues before the clients learn about them through customers or patients. Then, we've really prevented a problem that we hate to have to deal with in our offices.
That's a great point, and I think that that's a point that you would want to weave in when you're designing the evaluation form. You want to use verbiage and phrasing that kind of reinforces a positive message and really reinforces what the client expects. If the client expects certain greetings or whatnot, then you can kind of help design those into the audit or the call listening form or any guidance that you publish to help people know, hey, these are the things I'm supposed to be doing, and be pretty upbeat about it. What do you think about that, Debra?
Yeah, I agree with that completely. I think, Even how you word your evaluation form can really make a difference related to whether people see it as positive or punitive. So, one thing, for example, on forms that I've developed, when we're looking for or hoping not to find people, violating the law, like maybe misrepresenting something or another, the way that we word that on our form is, the agent avoided misrepresentation. And so then you can check that yes, and that's a great thing. That's the behavior that you want, and so it shows the agents that we're looking for them to do things right. I think also what's very helpful in designing the evaluation form when it comes to actually conducting the evaluation is making sure that your form sort of follows, the flow of the call that you're expect to be evaluating. I think we all train a certain call flow because it seems like a logical way to do things, and it helps us to meet compliance requirements. Including the items in sort of the general order in which you expect them to occur will just make the evaluation or the monitoring actually more efficient and more effective, and it helps prevent overlooking things as you're scoring a call. Is that your experience, Leslie?
That is, and I also find that account reps or call center representatives love to have the evaluation form as almost a checklist in front of them so they know what to expect. I think it can really influence behavior. The old adage, what gets measured gets done, and I think that having the form arranged automatically, I think also if you know up front that some of the things in your call auditing scorecard or snapshot or whatever you call it to be upbeat, if you have things in there that would automatically cause a call to be unacceptable, whether to client or regulator, those things should be bolded or should stand out in the form so that it is easy for people to understand, if I don't close this call with an appreciation statement, this call won't be evaluated or audited or listened to as meeting our expectations. In the olden days, we used to separate out compliance stuff from business stuff. And I don't think that that's necessarily valuable from the employee standpoint. They just want to be able to follow a roadmap and do the right thing. And I think that it helps just to blend them chronologically, as you suggest, Debra. I think that's really quite helpful. So now that we've figured that out, Debra, tell me, what are your ideas about the best way to score collectors on their call performance? What are some practical things you've done that have made the program successful?
That's a great question. There are a couple of ways to look at scoring collectors on call performance. And on one hand, one side of the coin, some agencies that I think maybe sort of data heavy potentially or data oriented like to give people a score that's in a range. So they'll try to score someone, say 5 for they did it perfectly, or 4 for they did it pretty well but they didn't meet all the requirements, or 3 down to 2 and 1, and 1 would be probably a fail. They didn't really meet any of the requirements that are on this form. And so that does create a score that then can be driven into performance data that matches up with maybe collection performance or other criteria that we have. So if you're going to do that, it's important to have a very specific rubric that helps people to understand what the requirements are to get a 5. What are the requirements to get a 4? So, people aren't surprised when they see the results of their call monitoring sessions. On the other hand, there's the sort of yes, no, and not applicable approach where each item is scored individually as to did the agent do this or did they not do this? And then that can drive a score as well. And it does give you data, but I think it's not quite as granular as the other approach. Is there one that you prefer, Leslie?
The best method for scoring is the one that is sized to fit appropriately to the complexity of your organization. And even if you want to get to, let's say, a 10-point scorecard or, red, yellow, green or whatever, I think it makes sense to start slow and build up in complexity so that you can kind of socialize the idea and get people bought in, and also listen to how other people might interpret stuff. So my only practical advice is to try very hard not to make things so complicated at the beginning that the complications or complexity become an obstacle. I love the use of rubrics or other forms that say, this is what would make this red, this is what would make this yellow, this would make this green, because again, I think that adults who are trying to do the right thing in a call center like to have an idea of what is expected. And even if it evolves over time, and even if you allow them to contribute to it, I think all of that helps people embrace the idea of having their calls listened to. I think you also can create contests where people can nominate their best calls, and then you would use all of this to sort of feed, well, how'd you know it was the best call? And to create some energy around the program that's positive and some recognition. What do you think about that?
Well, I love that idea. And two things you said I really like very much. And one is that sort of red, yellow, green approach to scoring calls, because that's less intimidating to a lot of people who aren't numbers oriented. You know, if they can quickly visualize, oh, I got a green light on that one, I did a really good job, or, ooh, that's a yellow, so let me see how I can improve so that I score green the next time. If they're not numbers oriented, the numbers can be intimidating. So I really like that approach, and I think it's a good approach to use if you're just starting in to doing call auditing, to get people used to the idea. And if you're going to change to sort of a data-based approach, you can help people understand the numbers and what they mean based on the way that your rubrics are written. So the second thing, you know, that you said that I agree with very much is making sure that your rubrics are explicitly state the expectations, because adults really need that. They need to know what's being measured so that they can improve on those measurements. I love that approach.
And maybe you could get two-way feedback on that so that you could roll it out and then ask people, hey, when you see this in the rubric, does it make sense to you, or should it be worded a different way that would help jog your memory about stuff you're supposed to do? You know, I love for the whole call listening process to be two ways. I think that a lot of times when you play calls and then show the scorecard to people, they realize, oh my gosh, do I sound like that when I'm closing a call, or are my transitions that herky-jerky, or whatever it is? Also, things that I think can help inform a rubric might be creating a library of calls of fame, even if it's a mashup, so that you protect the privacy of actual consumers, and you cut and paste, you know, a mashup of good calls. Hey, here's an example of a great call opening, or here's an example of how the collector overcame the sort of scorpion dance that sometimes can happen at the beginning of a call, where the customer says, who is this? Why are you calling? And the agent says, oh, you know, I can't tell you until you identify who you are and give me your last four of your social or your date of birth, and it just sort of goes back and forth. So sometimes having examples in a library of how you would get all the points in a rubric can be helpful too.
Yeah, I really like that because, you know, every call is different. You're not going to have two calls the same day that are exactly the same just because we're talking to different people all day. Providing examples for acceptable behavior is so positive for collectors. And the other thing you said a minute ago that I really love is when you're starting out the process, or maybe you're revising your form, for example, include people from all levels of the organization, especially those folks that are going to be subject to the call monitoring. Get their feedback. You know, what do you think this call should sound like? What have you heard that's very acceptable, and what do you think people might be saying that we should listen for and try and change that behavior? And how can we accommodate that on our call evaluation form?
And I'm glad you mentioned that, because I think that no two calls ever are going to be alike. And if you find yourself in a spot where people feel that unless they have exactly the same cookie-cutter call, then your system is not well designed. I think that would be a warning sign, because part of what we love about conversational intelligence is that we want to cultivate an environment where people are really actively listening on the telephone. So scripts and talking points are helpful. We have to embrace the reality that even if we train our people perfectly and they never fail, there's another person who doesn't have to follow any of those rules on the other side of the call, who may have a complex of things going on in their life that are going to have an effect on how they carry on their part of the conversation. So I think our forms and our rubrics have to be designed to expect active listening and to reward it, and conversational intelligence. Okay, you knew based on the answer you got straight away in this call that going on to talking points 6, 7, and 8 would be fruitless. So that was awesome when you pivoted on the call, and your call evaluation rubric should account for this, that when you hear something that's unexpected, that you pivot effectively so that you really are running the call in a consumer-centric way. I really like the idea that your rubric itself would say, we all know that no two calls are exactly alike. It is how you pivot and modify to accommodate the consumer that is a critical feature of a successful call.
Yeah, I agree with that completely. And the hard part then is making sure that we're scoring consistently when we're doing our call audits. And I think the best way to do that is to conduct call calibration sessions with all the different parties that might be involved in that listening process. So you've got your call auditors that may be only doing call audits, that's all they do, but certainly your supervisors and managers are listening to calls and doing some scoring, as well as compliance folks and maybe even our clients. And I have been in a number of many call calibration sessions with clients where sometimes client education is a part of that process. But I think that when there are inconsistencies, it's really important for those call calibration sessions to occur so that the scoring is consistent, don't you think?
I absolutely think so. And I think that calibrations are ideal because it is also a good way to find out if you have mistakes in your understanding. We're finding that more and more of our clients want us to evaluate calls or send them random calls for them to evaluate so that they can assure themselves that we are operating in a consumer-centric manner. And I think that the key to all this are calibration sessions. And I love the idea of pre-circulating some calls, maybe encouraging people to listen to them before they come to the call. Maybe give everybody the call review or call listening form or scorecard or snapshot or whatever you call it. And then see when everybody comes in how they functioned independently using your rubric as a way to get everybody to say, okay, well, let's negotiate a little. If Debra thinks the call should have been yellow here because of this, let's talk this out and make sure that we all agree with that so that from a consistency standpoint, you make an excellent point, Debra. We want to make sure that people don't feel whipsawed or that everybody doesn't line up under one call listener because they know that person is softer touch. So what else besides pre-circulating stuff and letting people flex their own call listening muscles are some things that you think should be involved in the call calibration session?
I'd like to include the agents who are being evaluated in some of these call calibration sessions because that gives you a teachable moment where if there was an issue that occurred, they can see the conversation among the people that might have scored the session to see what the thought processes are behind the scoring, so they see it's not just sort of a arbitrary checkbox that has to be filled in, but there's really some thought processes behind it. And we can also get the feedback from those agents about, well, why they said what they said, or, it's hard for them sometimes to remember, well, what were you thinking at this point in time, because the call could have been a month ago and they do hundreds of calls a day, but it'll come back to them. And I have been collectors who went into a calibration session really dreading it, coming out with a whole new understanding of how to serve the client, how to serve consumers, and actually how to be more effective in their calls, which it contributes to their own bottom line. So I really advocate having the agents in calibration sessions, not maybe all of them, but I think significantly they should attend once or twice a year just to get a feel for what's being talked about in that room.
I think that's great, and I think that it can improve people's job satisfaction. Wow, my company invested this time in me, to make sure that I do a better job. this also can be a great selling point for clients to be able to see this and to be able to, even if the clients are not part of the calibration sessions that you would conduct with employees, being able to say to the employee, oh yeah, I understand why you said that on the call, but here's how it's interpreted by our client. Perhaps we want to understand that our client's mission and philosophy is inconsistent with your approach. Nothing wrong with your approach. It's just not the way this client would go about that. It is a teachable moment, and you know you're successful when you walk out and you hear people on a team saying, no, in my calibration session, we were able to see the client's evaluation, and this is how the client sees it. So to me, when they're sharing with each other some of the feedback they got in this session, then I feel like we've been successful. Let me ask you this, Debra, as a director of compliance and you worked in an extremely large call center where you could not personally touch and feel every single agent all the time, what were your ideas about working with collectors to address issues that you might identify through your call listening program?
So there are a couple of approaches that you can take, but we had a team of people who were just called performance specialists, and they would take the results of these call listening and call monitoring forms and have one-on-one meetings with the collector. Sometimes the supervisor would be in the meeting if they were available and if it was possible. But we took the results of those forms very seriously because our clients took them very seriously too. And even when there wasn't a client-related issue to discuss, we still thought it was important, especially if the collector failed the call audit. It's extremely important to provide that feedback. And so we took the time to do a one-on-one meeting. They don't have to be long, 10, 15 minutes, just depending on the sort of severity of the problem, or sometimes it's just a little tweak was required. Put this disclosure before that disclosure because it only makes sense to do it that way. You know, whatever the feedback might be, can do so much, only so much through email or written, and collectors would always be notified through email if they passed a call audit and what the form was, and here's a link to your call if you want to re-listen to it because it was really great. But those in which we identified problems, we felt really required some one-on-one attention, so we had staff members that was their whole job. We felt it was quite important. So what have you done in that regard?
We do calibrations with leaders and then let them turn around and do sessions with their people so that on every month or week or whatever basis, some of the feedback would come from the call listening team, but some would also come from the direct production supervisors of people so that you're sort of reinforcing a multitude of perspectives on the same thing. I guess you have some responsibility day to day for the people who sit closest to the collectors to have their ears perked for things and listen for things. We also have used the tactic of having some kind of mutual performance improvement plan in situations where somebody is sort of struggling with getting some of the aspects of the program. And we commit to stuff from the call listening, the independent call listening side, but also the person's immediate supervisor so that we avoid any sort of even appearance that there could be a disconnect between what the call quality team is listening for and what a performance manager might be listening for.
To piggyback on what you said, the other thing that's important to remember is that your call monitoring processes will create data. And using that data to help you determine what kind of training does this group need. So you're not just focusing on the behavior performance of an individual collector, but now you're looking at the teams and saying, okay, well, we've seen a downward trend in the use of appreciation statements at the end of calls, and that's not going to make our clients very happy. So let's have a training session, or let's provide a training module through e-learning or however you provide your training to folks, try and increase that score overall because that's important to our clients. So I just didn't want to leave out looking at your data because that can really drive what kind of training you need to reinstitute.
Exactly. And I think just piggybacking on that idea, because I see we're kind of running out of time here, I think that taking that feedback and then perhaps doing a learning event that incorporates what your call listening form looks like and what your rubric looks like, so that people in the teachable moment, I'm at this point in a call, I forgot what I'm supposed to do, they can pull it up almost as a job aid, I think is enormously valuable. We could talk about this forever. Thank you very much to our host and hostess, Alex and Anne, for letting us have this conversation about something that's near and dear to our hearts, which is kind of improving overall the way we meet our clients' needs, and we develop the collectors in our shop, in our call center, to be more productive and to be as compliant as possible, recognizing, as Debra pointed out, no two calls are alike.
Great. Thank you both so much.
We'll have a link to the Collector Magazine article in the show notes. You can subscribe to ACA Cast on Apple Podcasts or wherever you download your podcasts so you'll never miss a show. While you're at it, if you found value in the show, we appreciate your ratings on Apple Podcasts. Thank you for listening today, and we'll see you next time on ACA Cast.